The Joint Committee will come to order. If the photographers would please remove themselves. Today, the Joint Committee convenes its inaugural meeting in accord with the Budget Control Act of 2011. I welcome my colleagues from the House and the Senate, and my co-chair, Senator Murray, and I thank each and every one of you for agreeing to serve on the committee. Today's inaugural meeting is for the purpose of organizing the committee. There are 2 items on the agenda. Each member will have an opportunity to make an opening statement, and then the committee will take up consideration of its rules, after which we will adjourn. The Joint Committee has noticed its intention to hold its first hearing next week on September 13th, entitled The History and Drivers of Our Nation's Debt and Its Threat. Dr. Doug Elmendorf, Director of the Congressional Budget Office, will be our only witness. Finally, I wish to announce that my co-chair, Senator Murray, and I have agreed to alternate chairing our hearings and meetings, perhaps by alphabetical order or some other arbitrary criteria of which I am unaware. It was decided that I would chair the first meeting. Before the chair yields to himself, the chair wishes to remind all of our guests that any manifestation of approval or disapproval, including the use of signs or placards, is a violation of the rules of the House. The chair wishes to thank our guests in advance for their cooperation in maintaining order and decorum. The chair will now yield to himself for an opening statement. The late Spanish philosopher George Santayana famously wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to fulfill it." In 2009, Professors Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff published what may be the seminal work on the subject of past debt crisis, entitled This Time is Different. Studying many different examples over a vast expanse of world history, their work paints a tragic mosaic of high unemployment, currency debasement, civil unrest, lost economic growth, and in extreme cases, the collapse of a nation. This is a past that we in America do not want to fulfill. Unfortunately, when it comes to our own debt crises, the needle on the gauge has now entered the red zone. To begin, our debt threatens our jobs. Speak to any Fortune 500 CEO or any small businessman. It is clear that our debt hangs like the sword of Damocles over their hiring decisions. As one small business person in my district put it, "Jeb, I know somehow, someday, I'm going to have to pay for all this debt. So now is not the time I'm going to take the risk of buying a bunch of new equipment or hiring a bunch of folks." As his elected representative, how can I possibly ignore such sentiment, especially when I hear it everywhere, and I know that it is shared by thousands and thousands of job creators from coast to coast. I would hope it would be obvious to all that deficit reduction and a path to fiscal sustainability are themselves a jobs program. Secondly, our debt threatens our national defense. No less of an authority than the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, has said, quote, "The single biggest threat to our national security is our debt. In interest payments alone, we are enabling China to buy 2 jet fighters a week. Is it not our public duty to respond to this kind of warning with the same alarm and resolve that would be summoned to defeat any other threat to our nation?" Finally, our debt threatens our children's future. Ominously, spending has grown from its historic norm of 20% of our economy to 24% and is on a glide path to grow to 40% and beyond in the course of a generation. If financed through borrowing, interest payments alone would crush our economy. If financed through taxes, the tax burden would have to more than double, a burden never dreamed of by the American people and the businesses which employ them. Should we let this happen, I fear we would be the first generation in America's history to lead the next with less freedom, fewer opportunities, and a lower standard of living. I will not sit idly by and watch the American dream disappear for my 9-year-old daughter and my 7-year-old son. And I believe that is a sentiment shared by all of my colleagues. So what exactly is driving our debt? President Obama has said, quote, "The major driver of our long-term liabilities, everybody knows it, is Medicare and Medicaid and our health care spending. Nothing comes close," unquote. I agree. The president has also said, quote, "If you look at the numbers, then Medicare in particular will run out of money, and we will not be able to sustain that program no matter how much taxes go up. It's not an option for us to just sit by and do nothing," unquote. Again, I agree. This takes us to the charge of the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction. I have many hopes. I hope we were able to bring about pro-growth tax reform in order to bring about more revenues. I hope we're able to prioritize spending as families and small businesses do every day. I hope we're able to reform many different programs to make them more efficient and effective. But in order to succeed, I know this committee must be primarily about the business of saving and reforming social safety net programs that are not only failing many beneficiaries, but going broke at the same time. I approach our task with a profound sense of urgency, high hopes, and realistic expectations. Our task to achieve $1.5 trillion of bipartisan deficit reduction will not be easy, but it is essential. As we proceed, like any other committee in Congress, there will be public hearings. There will be ample opportunities for the public to have their opinions heard. And like any other committee of Congress, there will also be some discussions among members that will not be public. However, no final product will be adopted without ample public notice and a public vote according to the rules. Whatever this committee may achieve, I hope that we can at least agree that it is past time to quit spending money we do not have. It is past time to quit borrowing 42 cents on the dollar, much of it from the Chinese, and then sending the bill to our kids and our grandkids. I do not believe this committee alone will solve our nation's debt crisis. But a bipartisan negotiated reduction in the growth of our nation's debt would be a wonderful, needed, hopeful step in the right direction. Beyond this committee and this Congress, one day this generation will be judged. Will history record that we wrote the first chapter of America's decline, or will history record that we kept faith with the founding fathers and previous generations and left the next generation with greater blessings of liberty and vaults of limitless opportunities? The choice is ours. Let the work begin. The co-chair now yields to the distinguished co-chair of the committee, the gentlelady from Washington, Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Hensarling. Thank you for agreeing to co-chair this committee and all the work and time you've put in it to it so far, and all the commitment we have in the coming weeks to put together this challenge in front of us. And I want to thank all of our committee members as well for your commitment to this. Like all of us, I spent a lot of time this past month traveling around my home state and talking to struggling families. I heard from people from all walks of life with different challenges and hopes and ideas about where we need to go as a nation. But the one question I got from so many of them was, what is going on in Washington, D.C.? They're worried. Many of them are scared about what the future holds. They're frustrated. They want this country to work, and they know it can. But many worry that our government is broken, and at times it's easy to share their fear. This committee has the opportunity to show the American people we can still come together, put politics aside, and solve a problem that's plaguing our country. We each got into politics for a different reason, but I'm quite certain none of us came here to engage in the kind of petty bickering that has been dominating the discourse here in Washington, D.C. recently. We may not all agree on the solutions to our problems, and we may not even agree about what the biggest problems are. But I know every one of us understands our great nation faces serious challenges. I hear from so many families about the jobs crisis that is devastating the middle class that we need to work together on as a nation to address. I hear from businesses that are struggling, especially small businesses, that are having a tough time creating the jobs that millions of Americans are desperate to fill. And because of this sluggish economy, as well as for structural and policy reasons, our federal government is facing deep, short, and long-term deficits and a growing national debt that, if left unchecked, will be an overwhelming burden handed down for our children and grandchildren to bear. So there's no doubt that our country faces deep and serious problems, but I am confident that we can face them together and come out stronger because we've done it before. As serious as the problems we face now are, our country has faced greater. Our people and our political system have always found a way to meet our challenges, move beyond them, and flourish. And that is why I agreed to co-chair this Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction, and I'm proud to get to work with all of our committee members who've shown they are also serious about the challenge in front of us. It's not because I believe this committee is going to solve every one of the problems our country faces, and certainly not because I believe the task we are charged with is going to be easy or pain-free. It's because I believe we owe it to the families we all represent to finally come together, put their needs first, and work together to find a solution that will put our nation on a solid path forward. This committee is made up of 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans. We each come to this task with our own strong set of principles, beliefs, and priorities for the country that we love. And while none of us will ever set aside or betray our principles, we must keep in mind there is much more that binds us as Americans than divides us, and we must all be open to compromise and to the ideas and viewpoints of others. That's why I've been so glad that as we have gotten this process off the ground over the last few weeks, committee members have refrained from drawing lines in the sand or carving out areas that can't be touched. And as we move forward, I hope we can continue to not allow ourselves to be boxed in or pigeonholed by special interest groups or partisans or media or pundits, and we are allowed the room to come to a balanced agreement. There's broad understanding among us that economic growth and job creation are the best ways to reduce the deficit and debt, though we certainly have some real differences regarding how to achieve that. But if we want to get our country back on track, we must come together around a balanced plan that can pass through this committee with bipartisan support, pass through both chambers of Congress, get signed into law, and that we can be proud to take to the American people. A successful final product from this committee will not be one that any one of us would have written on our own. It will have to include compromises on all sides. We have not been given much time to accomplish this, but thankfully we are not starting from scratch, far from it. Together we can build on the work of many from both sides of the aisle who've worked hard over the last few years on deficit reduction proposals. Now families across America are looking to this committee to take those last few steps and get this done. The same families that sat at their own kitchen tables making tough choices about their fiscal future. This will not be easy, but we can do it. And I'm looking forward to getting to work with my colleagues on this critical and serious task. Today we will be discussing a set of proposed rules for this committee that I've worked on closely with Representative Hensarling, and I want to echo what the co-chair has said about them. I'm confident they're going to give this committee the structure it needs to conduct our business transparently, get input from experts and members of the public, and work together to pass a bipartisan plan that works for the American people. I believe the American people deserve to have full access to committee business the way they do with every committee here in Congress, and I believe these rules will allow us to do exactly that. As my colleague from Texas said, we looked at how House and Senate committees operate, and we worked together to make sure this committee met publicly, but also had the ability to meet just among members to discuss important issues. And as this committee works to bring its final product forward, let me make it clear that that product and that process will be public, so my colleagues and the American people will know what the committee has put together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. And the co-chairman now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Senator Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to say first that I appreciate the way you and Senator Murray have laid out the critical task before us. The truth is, this extraordinary committee exists because nothing else has worked to address the serious fiscal crisis before us, and one that threatens to sink an already weak economy. The signs are all around us: record deficits, unsustainable debt, a bond rating downgraded for the first time in the history of our great country. The faltering economy and this budget problem that was talked about earlier are, of course, both linked. An economy burdened by excessive government spending and borrowing doesn't create jobs. It creates uncertainty and caution. And an economy failing to create jobs, of course, stretches the government's resources even further and fails to create the revenue needed to close the gap. How to fix the budget problems and grow the economy are the twin challenges of our time, and both must be addressed together. This committee has been tasked with reducing the deficit by $1.5 trillion over the decade. It's a significant task, and frankly, reductions of this level have never been done before in any single piece of legislation. Cutting $1.5 trillion, though, can be achieved, and it must be achieved. Think about it this way. Cutting $1.5 trillion means cutting just 3.5% of total projected federal spending over the next decade. Think of how many families and businesses we all represent who have had to do much more in the past few years. Some have asked why we shouldn't be doing more. And, you know, as I calculate it, based on the more realistic so-called current policy baseline using CBO data, over the next 10 years, the debt is likely to increase by about $13 trillion. So our goal of $1.5 trillion would reduce that increase in the debt by only about 12%. So yes, we should aim higher. We should aim to do what's necessary to bring long-term sustainability to the federal budget. The American people want this. The financial markets, the credit agencies are looking for this, and future generations who will be inheriting this debt deserve this. But let's at least hit our $1.5 trillion target. And let's keep in mind that long-term sustainability also means that merely reaching the 10-year target isn't enough. The quality of reforms matter more than the quantity of reforms over the next 10 years. Tweaks and one-time savings could add up to $1.5 trillion over 10 years, yet they would leave in place soaring future deficits caused by unreformed entitlements. I'm sure there would be a spirited debate in this committee over tax policy, but let's keep in mind that the long-term deficits projected are caused by rising spending, not declining revenues. Even if we were to keep all the tax rates where they are today, meaning the laws have to be changed to extend all the tax cuts from 2001, 2003 to patch the alternative minimum tax, the Congressional Budget Office figures show that revenues would still exceed the 18% of GDP historical average over the last 50 years over this next decade. Spending, on the other hand, has already jumped from its historic average of about 20% to about 24% of GDP, and in future decades without reform, of course, is projected to soar well beyond that, to 25, 30, 40, 50% of GDP. So we should aim for structural reforms that preserve and strengthen the important entitlement programs, ensure the benefits are there for those in need, but also reining in costs that threaten to bankrupt these programs for our children and grandchildren. This doesn't mean we should ignore taxes. We should try to fix our complex anti-growth tax code. Common sense tax reforms can eliminate unjustified tax preferences, apply those savings to lower, more competitive tax rates to encourage savings, investment, and jobs. That'll create economic growth and generate more revenue. To the co-chairs, I look forward to working with my colleagues in this committee on the urgent and serious task before us. The American people are counting on us, and we can't let them down.
Co-chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Congressman Becerra.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging our co-chairs, Senator Murray and Congressman Hensarling, along with all of my colleagues for their acceptance of this challenge to serve the American people in this difficult task. We face a defining challenge. Will we embrace this opportunity to lead and put our economy back on track, or will we let the cynics and naysayers carry the day? We should start this process without preconditions or limitations. it is precisely because of its difficult nature that we need to step up and not cower from the challenge before us. I'm confident each one of my colleagues would agree that we must live and breathe believing that failure is not an option. We can prove to the American people that their country, their representative democracy, is still alive and well. We can do that by simply listening to them. They have been telling us time and time again to put on the same uniform and work not as Democrats and Republicans, but as Americans, to treat everyone on the team fairly, not favoring powerful special interests as we look to spread the pain and the gain. And they have said to us loud and clear, tackle the biggest deficit, the jobs deficit, as we restore fiscal responsibility to our budget. Not too long ago, our country saw record budget surpluses and our economy experienced the best decade of job creation in a generation. Times have changed. This committee must be completely honest and open with the American people about what drove us here and how we plan to solve this fiscal challenge. This committee should be transparent throughout its process. We must identify the drivers of the deficit, point out the waste, fraud, and abuse in the system, and shine a light through any loopholes, for the taxpayers deserve nothing less than complete accountability. These are tough times. The sad reality is that 14 million American workers are still out of a job through no fault of their own. These are honest folks who are out there right now looking for an honest day's work. And the fact of the matter is, these folks would be happy to be paying taxes again instead of drawing an unemployment check. And that's the best way to reduce the deficit. Put Americans, millions of Americans, back to work and get the economy growing. For America works when Americans are working. We should set out to ensure that any plan we propose does not get in the way of any American willing to work from getting a job. But that's only part of the solution. We must achieve balance, policies that promote economic recovery and investment with smart, responsible, long-term deficit reduction. By listening to the American people and allowing them to learn about the causes of these deficits through numerous and robust hearings and meetings, we can lead our country to find a sound solution to our deep fiscal troubles. I look forward to working with each and every one of my colleagues on an American solution to this challenge. Let's get to it. I yield back my time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Congressman Camp.
Well, thank you, Chairman Hensarling and Chairman Murray, fellow members of the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction. The problem we face is obvious. There's too much government spending and too much federal debt, which are impeding our economy's ability to grow. As a result, too few private sector jobs are being created. We know it, and the American people know it. A quick look at the facts show that this committee has its work cut out for it. There were 0 net jobs created in the month of August. Roughly 14 million Americans remain out of work as the unemployment rate continues to hover around 9%. And the total debt for fiscal year 2010 reached $13.6 trillion, or 93.1% of gross domestic product, and it's growing at an astronomical and unsustainable rate. By the end of this fiscal year, our debt will exceed our GDP. And according to expert testimony before the Bowles-Simpson Debt Commission, this current debt-to-GDP ratio of over 90% has already cost us 1 million jobs. These problems have been decades in the making and happened on both parties' watch. Frankly, both parties have also refused to enact many of the necessary and well-known solutions. Simply put, Washington has overpromised and underperformed. As a result, this committee must make, and then hopefully our colleagues will concur with the tough decisions needed to find at least $1.5 trillion in debt reduction and take another step towards getting Washington's spending under control so our economy can get back on track. As I stated when I was named to this committee, the final product must be looked at through the prism of job creation. Will the recommendations we make help or hurt job creation now and in the future?
But the gentleman will suspend until the disturbance is taken care of. Please, if the staff will shut the doors.
No, I can keep going. Sure.
If the staff would, to the best of their ability, shut the door, and we will continue our proceedings. The chair believes the American people want to see this committee succeed. So if members perhaps could speak a little bit more loudly
I will
than
try to do that.
usual.
I didn't
The
mean-
chair again recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Well, thank you. I didn't mean for my remarks to empty the room, but I'm from a big family, so I'm used to a lot of background. But let me just continue by saying, by reducing the burden the federal debt places on employers, families, and taxpayers, we can help get the country back on track and Americans back to work. Comprehensive tax reform would spur economic growth and job creation and should be a part of our discussions. The task before us is daunting, and it's not one that lends itself to quick fixes. I urge my colleagues to be bold and to focus on both the short-term and long-term impact of our recommendations. And while I'm not naive, I am optimistic that we can succeed, and I look forward to working with all of you on the committee. Thank you. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Montana, Senator Baucus.
Can't hear. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we couldn't hear Representative Camp. So I
I'll
don't
make
know.
sure you get a copy of my remarks.
Okay.
I'm sure that'll be...
I'll read them very closely.
You know, if the gentleman will yield, we call this room informally the Big House, and we're just getting ready for the night game against Notre Dame on Saturday. This side is yelling go, and this is blue over here, so it's...
Okay.
We will attempt to gain order. Again, I do not know when the disturbance in the hallway will be taken care of, and so I would like for us to go ahead and proceed, and
fine.
certainly the American people can hear our statements, and it's being recorded for the
I'll begin, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the first part of August, when I was in Montana, I was climbing on a mountain, about 10,500 feet high up on this mountain. My cell phone rang. It was Leader Reid, asked me if I wanted to be on this committee. And I said I would like to have that honor. And I got off the mountain, started talking to Montanans. I got to tell you, I've never, in the years I've been in public service, experienced in such a short period of time so many people saying exactly the same thing to me with such enthusiasm. Basically, Max, gee, we're sure glad you're on that committee, but we sure do feel sorry for you. It's a big task you got ahead of you. We wish you all the very, very best because it's something that's got to be accomplished. I think that expresses a lot of the wisdom of the American people. Namely, we've got a huge problem ahead of us, and the American people want us to solve it. It's pretty simple. I have a couple of just basic points. Number one, I think that we should aim higher rather than lower. We're charged with reducing the deficit by about 1.5 trillion. I think we should try to do more, because if we can do a little more, then we will be able to get our fiscal house in order much more quickly than we otherwise might. We also must recognize that we are at a real crossroads here. That is, if the country is looking at us, the country, business is looking at us, consumers are looking at us. There's a lot of uncertainty in the country today, a lot of uncertainty in the world today, and if we can get our act together, we as a country, and get our fiscal house in order, I think that will address a lot of the uncertainty that exists today and is causing us to move or slip back into recession, or at least causing us not to create the jobs that we want to create. We have to be balanced, clearly. We have to be fair. We have to include revenues. It's not just spending, it also is revenues. Many groups have done a lot of good work, plowed a lot of ground. Bowles Simpson, Domenici Rivlin, Gang of Six, lots of proposals out there. People worked extraordinarily hard, put a lot of energy into trying to solve the problem. We clearly should take advantage of their work because it's very good work done by a lot of very good people. Jobs. Clearly, since the statute was passed creating this commission, there's been a greater need for and a greater cry for jobs, more jobs. Clearly, efforts we undertake must help find a way to get more jobs. More jobs means more growth. More growth means more revenue. More revenue means we can solve this problem more easily. So I ask my colleagues, as we work together, Lyndon Johnson once said, it's been said thousands of times, one cannot solve very much by oneself. Rather, it takes cooperation and working together to achieve problems. We will only do what the American people want us to do if we work together, if we keep our eye on the ball, not get distracted by a lot of stuff, and just dig down really deep, because it's going to take digging down deep to get this thing solved. Thank you.
Co-chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think several of my colleagues have addressed the magnitude of this problem. I think we all understand it's huge. It's my hope that our response will be commensurate. The fiscal mess that we're in now threatens our livelihoods, our prosperity, opportunity, and even national security. But we have an extraordinary opportunity to do something about it, to begin to put our government on a sustainable fiscal path, and to do it in a way that will encourage economic growth and the job creation that we all know we badly need. I think the challenge calls for a bold response. You know, we could choose to just nibble around the edges of this problem and just look for redundant programs and obsolete programs, and we need to do that. We need to find them. They're out there. It might even be that they'll add up to $1.5 trillion, which is our statutory goal. But if that's all we do, then I would suggest, as I think Senator Portman observed, that we wouldn't really be doing all that's necessary to put us on a pro-growth, sustainable path. If we're going to truly meet the challenge that we face, I think we do need to address the big entitlement programs that we all know are driving this fiscal problem. And we all know that's not easy. It's not easy for any of us to do that. We've all got many constituents who rely on these programs. It means that we'd have to make some real changes, but we can do it in a way that protects the vulnerable members of our society that we want to protect, and still put these programs on a viable and sustainable path. We can only do it if we do it in a bipartisan fashion. That's a big opportunity for us. The other thing that we've got to do is maximize economic growth and job creation. Let me just underscore, if we can find a way to create policies that will encourage annual growth to expand just 1% per year faster than it otherwise would, that alone generates $3 trillion in additional revenue over 10 years. $3 trillion smaller deficits, $3 trillion less in debt, and millions of additional jobs if we can foster stronger economic growth. How do we do that? Well, I would observe, number one, cutting spending and reducing the deficit is itself pro-growth because it removes the chilling effect that excessive deficits have on job creators and investment. But the other big opportunity for us is tax reform. You know, a simpler, fairer system that has lower marginal rates would encourage economic growth and go a long way to helping this problem. I think our tax code is a national embarrassment. Both parties are guilty of getting it to the point where it is now. I mean, examples abound. We have ethanol credits that are bad economic, bad agriculture, bad tax policy. We use the tax code to force Americans to pay more for inefficient sources of electricity. That costs us jobs. And when huge, iconic American corporations can pay little or no income taxes, well, that's just indefensible. So I think we ought to wipe out those special interest favors, have commensurately lower rates, encourage the economic growth that will generate more revenue, generate more jobs. Mr. Chairman, it's a very big challenge that we face. I hope we'll rise to the occasion.
Thank you. The co-chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Congressman Clyburn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair. It's a real pleasure for me, and I'm very humbled to join you and my colleagues on this Joint Select Committee. As I mentioned in my op-ed piece, which was published in the Washington Post earlier this week, the enthusiastic reaction of my constituents and others has caused me to reflect upon having been growing up in a parsonage. Despite the expectations of us, we are not the chosen 12. I entered these deliberations with a clear vision, an open mind, and a willingness to find common ground. I've always said that if the distance between me and an opponent is 5 steps, I don't mind taking 3 of them. I am hopeful that we will not allow our political differences to get in the way of economic common sense and duties to God and country. Getting people back to work is the quickest way to restore confidence in us as an elected body and the country as a land of opportunity. Last month, I held a town hall meeting on the campus of Voorhees College in Bamberg County, South Carolina. That county has an unemployment rate of 17.5%. The 3 neighboring counties have jobless rates ranging from 17 to 19.8%. People didn't want to hear a lot about fancy Washington talk about debt and deficits. They wanted to hear about jobs, restoring the dignity of work. They want to work, and they want their government to work. We need to make smart and compassionate budget cuts, targeting waste, fraud, and abuse, eliminating unnecessary and duplicative spending, and ending military adventurism need not be accompanied by slashing essential services like public education and shredding safety nets and earned benefits like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Any solution to our debt problems must be fair. It is just plain wrong to put all the burden of debt and deficit reduction on the elderly, the middle class, and the poor. Recent studies indicate that there is a growing wealth gap in this country that is squeezing the middle class and pushing millions into poverty. We need to work together to address these urgent priorities. Economic fairness and common sense call for reducing inequities in our tax code, closing unfair loopholes, and eliminating outdated and unnecessary tax subsidies. Debt and deficit reduction should be twined into a strong cord of job creation, budget cuts, and tax reform. Taken individually, neither one of them will sufficiently restore consumer confidence, regain domestic tranquility, and maintain our national security. The American people are counting on us to work together and get the job done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The co-chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Congressman Upton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to thank the 2 chairs for their leadership in the few short weeks since this panel was named. I spoke to both of you throughout August and appreciate the quick action to begin assembling a strong staff to coordinate our work, develop the rules package that we'll consider today, and take all the other logistical steps to allow us to really hit the ground running today. I spent virtually all last month at home in Michigan, meeting with my constituents and doing all the things that we do, forums, county fairs, etc. Michigan is a great state. It's a place where folks were drawn to as they built their own American dream. Our state produced some of the world's greatest inventions and industries, and it was an economic hub. And now it is on the front lines of an economic downturn. We've endured now 32 consecutive months of double-digit unemployment. Manufacturing jobs have disappeared, and more jobs are at risk because of regulatory burdens and economic uncertainty. I don't think any state has more at stake, and my constituents know it. They know that this committee was created to make the tough but necessary choices to cut spending and make reforms to put us on a more stable, long-term fiscal footing. Removing economic uncertainty and demonstrating that we can reverse our long-term debt and deficits trends will help spur job growth. If I heard one thing consistently, it was this: the American people want us to succeed. They know the job of this committee and this Congress, it's not an easy one. But all of us, the 12 of us here, and every one of our House and Senate colleagues were sent to do what's right for the nation, and they're rooting for us. The American people know how high the stakes are, too. But let me read you something from this week's National Journal. For the first 10 months of fiscal year 2011, revenues are up about 8% over last year, and spending has risen less than 3%. Revenue from income and payroll taxes grew, even though Congress cut payroll taxes to stoke the economy. but the good news ends there. Economic growth slowed to a crawl in the first half of the year. Many analysts predict that the economy will grow less than 2% in 2012, about half as fast as many had thought previously. If the gloomy new outlook turns out to be right, the deficit over the next decade will be hundreds of billions of dollars higher than either CBO or OMB's forecast. Cutting spending is essential to jumpstart our economy and prevent the kind of downturn that we're being warned about. And if we don't succeed, we risk further damage to our credit rating and deeper erosion in confidence, both of which will worsen the cycle. My goal for this committee is to begin by seeking common ground. Surely there are areas where we can agree. Surely we can identify areas where we are not spending taxpayer dollars wisely and where we can do better. Every taxpayer dollar that we spend, every program on the books, can be viewed through the lens of job creation and fiscal responsibility. Are we spending the people's money wisely? Are we supporting job growth and economic certainty? Those are the questions that I look forward to working with my colleagues to find the right solutions. I yield back.
Thank you. The co-chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Senator Kerry.
Us to take on this job about the mission. They said that we shall produce recommendations and legislation to significantly affect the short-term and long-term fiscal imbalance of the federal government, reducing the federal debt by at least $1.5 trillion. The critical words are at least 1.5 and significantly affect the long-term imbalance. The only way to meet that challenge is to achieve a larger agreement that grows our economy, puts America back to work, and addresses the deficit, sending the message loud and clear that Congress is serious and prepared at last to make the hard choices. In fact, the real mission of this committee comes from the American people, who wonder if we still can and desperately want us to sit down like adults and make the Congress work so that our economy can work again for the American people. So yes, we're here to examine the numbers, but frankly, we're also here to examine our consciences and look beyond narrow consideration of party or ideology to address the broader needs of our nation. Our national debt is $14.7 trillion, but we've also got a jobs deficit. 26 million Americans looking for work, and we can't fix our budget without fixing jobs, and we can't fix jobs without fixing our budget. We have to restore confidence, and we need to do it in a hurry. The world is watching, and our strength at home determines our strength in the world. Only a few days ago, Russian Prime Minister Putin said that in today's global economy, you only need to really deal with 5 countries, and America wasn't one of them. None of us were sent here to accept an economic future where the United States doesn't make the list, let alone top it. And here at home, Americans are watching. In less than 13 years, if we don't take significant steps, our government will only be able to fund Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and the interest on our national debt. Everything else would have to be deficit funded. By any measure, today's fiscal path is unsustainable. As we face this challenge, we need to remember that America does cherish a basic set of values. We believe in caring for the sick and bringing the elderly and disabled out of the shadows, and that every young person deserves opportunity and future. And we also believe that America must always prepare for that. As we engage in this effort, we cannot eat America's seed corn. We need to grow our economy. Some of us were here for Gramm-Rudman Hollings in the 1980s when we made tough decisions and committed ourselves to never increasing poverty or inequality as a sacrifice on the altar of deficit reduction. And in the 1990s, we saw how we balanced the budget in a balanced way. We can do it again. 3 bipartisan groups have spent thousands of hours working to find common ground. Rivlin Domenici, Simpson Bowles, and the so-called Gang of Six have all built a foundation. And we don't agree with every proposal, and neither do they. But they're roadmaps. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here, but we have to put our shoulder to the wheel and find the political willpower to get this done. None of us sitting here is so important or so permanent that we can ignore the demands of history or the demands of the moment. We have to find not just common ground, but higher ground. Some of the most fiercely independent, plain-talking, and determined partisans in American history have sat at the desks and tables and chambers that we will sit in, and they've tackled the toughest issues throughout our history. And they found common ground with people they disagreed with on near everything else. Now, it's our turn. I believe, I am convinced, there is a bipartisan consensus just waiting if the 12 of us are willing to sit down and forge it and make it real. That is our mission, and that is our charge, and I look forward to getting to work.
Thank you. The co-chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Senator Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and colleagues. I am struck by, and I suspect most of the people in the audience are too, by the commonality of views expressed here and by the very strong and united commitment to succeed. We're all hearing the same things from our constituents back home. There is a strong connection, everyone has acknowledged here, between our challenge of reducing the deficit and the necessity of job creation. I sense an optimism that we can succeed expressed by all of my colleagues, coupled with a hope that we can even do more, starting with the goal of $1.5 trillion deficit reduction, but hopefully moving beyond that to things like tax reform and entitlement reform that all of us acknowledge would help in the ultimate goal of job creation and economic growth. I'd like to, though, also end with a challenge to my colleagues and an admonition perhaps to those who think that this will be easy. I've been involved now in 3 different levels of these discussions. Starting last December, our colleague Chris Van Hollen and I met then, and then in the Biden talks, adding James Clyburn and Max Baucus, and then a week or 10 days of discussions down at the White House. And having gone through all of that, and having seen how difficult it is to reach an agreement, I think a dose of realism is called for here. This is tedious, time-consuming work, and it's going to require going through a lot of budget numbers line by line. We've already had a lot of hearings in both the House and Senate. It is time, I think, for us to get down to the hard decisions that are required to go through those line-by-line items. And as Chairman Murray pointed out, the time is short as well, which complicates our job. Not only must we act by November 23rd, but we have to have anything that we would make public 48 hours in advance. The CBO must score everything, and that can take weeks based upon some of the complicated things that we must do. So the reality is we really have to act by sometime by the end of October, realistically, which means we essentially have about 6 weeks to construct our package. And this is a long way of saying that we're only going to succeed if we can avoid partisanship, I would say, and try to limit the demands on the committee as well as the staff so that we can collectively work to achieve this goal. The more demands that are made on the committee and its membership, the more challenging it would be. It is true, as one of my colleagues said, the American people want us to succeed. And I'm going to do everything within my power to succeed in this challenge that the American people and our colleagues have laid before us. The future of our country is at stake.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Congressman Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I make a few remarks, I ask unanimous consent to give our colleague, Mr. Camp, a brief opportunity to complete his remarks.
Well,
Without objection.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman's sentiment. I don't think that's going to be necessary. What I said I'll also post online, and I appreciate very much his sentiment and would just yield back.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I join my colleagues here today in recognizing that we have a big responsibility to the American people, a responsibility to meet the twin challenges of doing everything in our power to put Americans back to work and put America on a steady, predictable path to deficit and debt reduction. These are not competing goals. They overlap. Every day that the economy is stalled is another day that the American people are hurting and another day that the deficit is growing. So the quickest, most effective way to reduce the deficit in the short term is to help grow jobs. Indeed, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has projected that for each 0.1% increase in GDP over the next decade, we reduce the deficit by about $310 billion. The biggest obstacle to economic growth right now is weak consumer demand. It's simple. Businesses are not going to hire employees unless they have customers for their goods and services. I know the American people are looking forward to the President's jobs plan tonight, and the President is going to need a partner in Congress to get the economy back on track. I hope we will work with him in a bipartisan fashion to do just that. Now, getting the economy moving again is just part of the solution. It will not in itself reduce the deficit. We know that. It must be coupled with a credible deficit reduction plan. The good news, as my colleague from Massachusetts said, is we don't have to start from scratch. We have two recent bipartisan commissions, as well as the work of the Gang of Six, that have provided a framework for the general approach we can take. Now, I don't agree with every proposal made by these groups, and I know that probably none of us do, but they do provide some overall scaffolding and the framework for a serious deficit reduction plan. The bipartisan commissions have several things in common. First, they warn against any action that could harm the economy, and in fact, Rivlin and Domenici propose recommendations to boost consumer demand. And second, they attack the long-term deficit challenge from both the spending and revenue sides of the equation. They take a balanced approach. They recognize that we need to modernize certain programs to achieve savings. They also recognize that we need to simplify and reform the tax code by cutting the pork, the subsidies, and the many preferences that benefit a slew of special interests. Simple math tells us that cutting $1 of tax expenditures does just as much to reduce the deficit as cutting $1 of programs. We have just 77 days left to complete our work. The clock is ticking. There are plenty of ideas out there for reducing the deficit that have been thoroughly debated, and we have a menu of options. So I think all of us would agree that if the committee were to fail, and I'm confident it won't, but it would be not for a lack of ideas, but for a lack of political will. There are some who believe that the next election will somehow bring about a huge new political alignment that will either allow Republicans or Democrats to get 100% of what they want in the way they want it. Both parties suffer from that illusion from time to time. And it's a dangerous illusion that will put the long-term economic health of our nation at risk. It's time for both sides to bite the bullet, to put the country first, get the economy moving, and implement a long-term deficit reduction plan. I stand ready to reach a reasonable compromise for the good of the country. Compromise is not a dirty word. In fact, it is the difference between a divided government that works and a dysfunctional government that doesn't. This Sunday, we all know, marks the 10th anniversary of the awful day when our nation was attacked. In the aftermath of that awful September day, our nation showed its true character as we rallied together to meet a common challenge. We must unite now to put America back to work, to get our fiscal house in order, and to ensure a brighter future for our children and our country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now calls up the rules of the Joint Committee and asks the clerk to report.
Proposed rules of the Joint Committee on Deficit Reduction.
Without objection, the first reading of the rules is dispensed with. The rules will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered, the chair recognizes himself. I think, as all members know, these rules were negotiated on a bicameral, bipartisan basis. They are designed to comport the rules of the standing committees of the House with those with the Senate to assure that this body can operate as closely as possible to any standing committee of either body. I urge their adoption and I yield back. Is there any other discussion of the proposed Joint Committee rules?
Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes the co-chair.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to enter into a colloquy to discuss the meaning of the term meeting as used in these rules. Both Clause 2 of Rule 11 of the Rules of the House and Rule 26 of the Standing Rules of the Senate provide for meetings for the transaction of business, which includes markups of legislation and reports. The House and Senate rules provide similar transparency requirements to those meetings as we have proposed in the rules of the Joint Select Committee. And I just want to clarify that the use of the term meeting in these rules has the same traditional meaning used in both houses and does not include less formal caucuses or working sessions that would not be covered by either the House or Senate rules in the normal or ordinary course.
If the gentlelady will yield, the distinguished co-chair is correct. That reflects our understanding as we have been working on this particular rules package. Is there any other discussion of the rules package?
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Would this be the appropriate time just to inquire about the hearing schedule?
The gentleman is yielded.
Thank
5
you.
minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we have our first hearing scheduled for next week. I think it's an important kickoff hearing from Mr. Elmendorf, the head of the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. I know we also have a requirement, appropriately, that we have a week's notice before hearings. And so I know the co-chairs are now involved in trying to decide what the hearing schedule would be. And I just want to underscore a point that I think a couple of us made. A number of us referenced, on both sides, referenced the work of bipartisan commissions, other bipartisan commissions that have met within the last year. We have Simpson-Bowles, we have Rivlin-Domenici, we also have the Gang of Six. And as I said, I doubt any of us subscribes to all of the proposals they made, but given the short amount of time that we've got, about 77 days, I would suggest and hope that it's appropriate that we get their input as we go along and try and get it as quickly as possible, because they spent a lot longer time than we actually have to address some of these issues, and at least they can provide a menu of options. We can take them or leave them as we wish. So I would just inquire of the co-chairs what the status of putting together the hearing schedule is.
Well, if the chairman will yield.
I'll yield to the distinguished co-chair.
Congressman Van Hollen, thank you for your question. The co-chair and I have been working through a series of decisions, including a number of proposals that we've received on the subjects and times for our hearings, and we hope to have a proposal to all of our members very quickly. We'll be working through that. I think we're very conscious of the need to get this done quickly. The 7-day notice obviously puts intense pressure on us, and we will be working through that, and we intend to get to all of our committee members as quickly as possible our proposal for hearings.
And I would certainly associate myself with my co-chair's remarks. Does the gentleman yield back? Is there further discussion on the rules package? If there's no further discussion, the question now occurs on favorably reporting the rules. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the rules are favorably reported. Without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the rules approved by the Joint Committee today. So ordered, the Joint Committee now stands adjourned.